Welcome to the Fave 5 podcast. This is edition number 6. I'm your host, Stan Garfield. In each edition, we have a special guest where we talk about their life. We get into the topics of the Fave 5 newsletter, and then we finish up with a couple of stories. Today, I'm very happy to have with me as my guest, Bill Sterling, who was my friend starting freshman year of college at Northwestern University back in 1971. So that's quite a while back. By my reckoning, that's about 54 years ago when we first met. We both were residents of the second floor of McCulloch Hall at Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois. And we met that year, became friends, and we've been friends ever since. So it's been a great friendship. We've done many things over the years, seen each other, traveled together, had a lot of fun, had a lot of laughs. So, Bill, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Stan. Glad to see you're going multimedia too. I'm looking forward to your TikTok channel.
That may be a while, but for now, we do have this featured both on all your major podcast audio platforms and on YouTube video. So you have your choice of medium. Let's start out by getting into your background. When and where were you born?
I was born in Chicago, probably the same year you were born in 1953, but I moved to Oak Park, where I think you were born as well, and moved there at an early age. And as you know, Oak Park's famous for people like Ernest Hemingway, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Ray Kroc, and a bunch of Frank Lloyd Wright houses. I think Ernest Hemingway once said that Oak Park was a town of wide lawns and narrow minds. So that was his take on Oak Park. But it also had some, you probably remember some notable mobsters too, like Tony Accardo and Sam Giancana. So a real mix of a town.
Well, we lived in a house in Oak Park that was in the Frank Lloyd Wright Historic District, but it was one of the only houses not designed by Frank Lloyd Wright.
That's memorable.
And I don't recall running into you back then. Do you think we ever crossed paths when we were 0 years old?
It's quite possible.
Okay.
I didn't know it at anything.
So since you were born in that area and lived in Oak Park, where have you lived since then?
I've lived aside from the Chicago area, because that include Evanston, where I went to school for a little while, Livonia, Michigan, Summit, New Jersey, Tokyo, New York City with the Chelsea area of Midtown Manhattan, the Orlando area, where I've lived a couple different places down here. And then I did a 6-month stint in Salzburg, Austria, when I was in college.
So in addition to us not running into each other back in 53 in Oak Park, we also had the bad timing to not line up here in Michigan. When you lived in Michigan, it was just before I moved to Michigan, and we never actually lived here at the same time, even though Livonia is just the next town over from Northville, where I live.
Yeah, that was definitely bad timing on my part.
I remember that when you told me you'd taken the job and we're going to live in Detroit, I remember thinking, oh no, Detroit, it's too bad that you have to live there. I had never been there, but I just didn't summon up a picture that was very good. But then years later, when I got to visit, I realized there was more to the area than what I had thought. What was your first reaction when you came to
Well, very,
Michigan?
very similar to yours. Michigan's a lovely state, and downtown Detroit was a bit of an exception to the rest of the loveliness.
So when you were growing up, you were in a large family. Who was in your family?
Well, there were 7 of us all together, 5 boys and 2 girls, and we grew up in a neighborhood with a lot of big Irish Catholic families. And I was the second oldest of that group. The oldest 4 were all born close together in the 50s, and then the youngest 3 were born in the 60s. But my paternal grandmother and grandfather had 50 grandchildren altogether. So family parties were pretty big events back then.
So a lot more grandchildren per grandparent then than today.
Yeah, I would say so.
Were they able to even know the names of all 50?
I bet that tested them pretty significantly towards their later years.
And was your extended family around? Did you get together with them very much?
We'd have parties at Thanksgiving, Easter, Christmas, things like that, and they were massive events.
Now, your house wasn't all that big to hold your family, was it? Did you all just kind of
Well,
squeeze in there?
you could spill out in the backyard and things when it was required.
What did your parents do?
My dad was a union sheet metal worker, and my mom was s- at one point an elementary school teacher, then a school librarian, and then sometimes a school counselor. Um, my mom had gone to night school to get her master's degree when I was in elementary school, and my dad always used to joke that she went to night school to learn to read in the dark. That was his take on it.
So was she able to go back to doing that, I suppose, after a while, after raising all of you?
Yeah, well, my parents moved to Florida and she worked for Rosarian Academy in West Palm Beach, which was a very nice girls' school run by the Dominican nuns. And she played the role of librarian and guidance counselor there, both roles pretty much.
So were you in when you were in elementary school and middle school and high school, what did you like to do back then?
Well, I really liked to read and I started very early. So, like, I scared myself half to death when I read a book called Hiroshima Diary by John Hersey when I was 6 years old. And then I worked my way through almost the entire science fiction section of Oak Park's public library. I wasn't much of an athlete in grade school, although I loved to spend many hours swimming at the very excellent public pools that Oak Park had. And then later on in high school, I took up swimming competitively and continued that in college. So I have nieces and nephews who are great swimmers. They say that I'm now what's known as a swammer.
But you did, in fact, compete against a famous swimmer, did you not, when you were at Northwestern?
Well, I swam in the same pool as Mark Spitz back in those days. I did not deserve to be even in the same water, not one drop of the same water as that guy. But yeah, Northwestern was in the league with Indiana University with Mark Spitz then.
Did you have a nickname as a swimmer?
Maybe the worst breaststroker in the Big Ten. That's kind of a long description, but pretty close to accurate. I was a better D3 swimmer than D1. Let's put it that way.
Okay. When you were in high school, did you have any activities besides swimming that you liked to do or that you engaged in?
I played Count Dracula in the school production of Dracula. So that was my big starring role as a senior in high school. So that, and I tried the chess club for a few days and realized I thought I had been a good chess player in grade school. And then I got to the Sharks who were roaming around Oak Park High and realized they were a totally, totally different level. But no, swimming and, basically the theater interest were there.
Do you still recall some of your lines as Count Dracula?
You fools, you think with your wafers and wolfsbane you could destroy me, the king of my kind? Like that.
I remember you reciting that at Northwestern, so you haven't lost the beat on that. So, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I took one of those career interest inventory tests when I think I was in about eighth grade. And it concluded that the worst possible fit for me would have been policeman. And I would say that was dead accurate. And it identified the best fit for me as librarian, probably because I like to read so much. But I don't really remember having strong career aspirations at an early age, other than that I knew I did not like hard work, as in physical labor. And then since I'm Catholic, I definitely toyed with the idea of becoming a priest at some point. But I was also interested in the idea of being a scientist too, inspired by all the science fiction I read.
Now, when you went to Northwestern, what did you think at that time you were going to prepare for?
Well, I initially took some pre-med classes in early college because I liked science and because I wanted to keep my career options open. But I also really liked economics after taking it in my freshman year. And so that's what I ended up majoring in. It turned out that one of my Northwestern professors, a guy named Dale Mortensen, later ended up getting a Nobel Prize in economics, although his class in labor markets was just way, way over my head.
So I recall that in addition to economics and thinking about being a doctor briefly, I recall you one time laying on your bed in your room contemplating that you wanted to be a world-class high jumper. Recall that?
Well, I had read an article saying that the ideal physique for a high jumper was something like 6'4" and 180 pounds, which was my physique back then. So I said, why not give it a shot? Well, I gave it a shot for about a week, and it was not to be.
So you did go to college, and you went to more than one college. Where did you go?
Well, I first went to Northwestern where we met and spent 2 years there. But I decided it wasn't really focused on teaching. They had outstanding, research academics, but I'd known someone who went to Carleton College in Minnesota, which was a very good school academically, but, focused more on teaching. And, transferred there my junior year after taking a year off between my sophomore and junior year.
So, what were your impressions of both Northwestern and Carleton? How did they compare?
Well, I liked Northwestern in terms of it was had that great location right on Lake Michigan where our dorm was, and I thought that it had some very good classes, but I didn't take many of them, and I ended up sometimes with teaching assistants who barely spoke English and that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed the move. I was very happy and think I made the right move when I moved to Carleton because the teachers there were much more focused on students, and I think some good mentorship from a couple of economics professors I had there that helped me get into a good grad school.
So, you got your undergraduate degree majoring in econ.
That's right. And I didn't decide on that until junior year, but the classwork I'd taken since the fact that I took quite a few science classes and math early on, helped me do well in the econ program when I made that choice junior
And when
year.
did you decide to go to graduate school?
In my senior year of college, I liked economics so much, and I considered law school a little bit, but decided, that grad school back then, if you got into a good grad school, they pretty much would pay your way for the first 2 years with stipends and teaching assistant positions and so on. So that was pretty appealing to me.
And how did you pick where you applied for grad school?
I just picked the best economics programs that I could read about and, was lucky enough to get to Harvard.
So, what did you think when you got accepted there?
I felt a little the same way I did being in the pool with Mark Spitz at Northwestern, which is, wow, these people are pretty impressive because, for example, I don't think he was in my class. I think he was a year ahead of me and a year younger, but Larry Summers, who later became Secretary of the Treasury, it turned out he had uncles on both sides of his family who were Nobel Prize winners in economics. Both of his parents were economists. He told stories about learning sort of negotiation theory when he was 4 or 5 years old. So there were some pretty amazing folks in that program, and I learned to be humble very quickly.
So, what was your experience like at Harvard?
It was a lot of studying, and I was interested in kind of branching out at a certain point after just 24/7 of doing technical economics for a couple of years. I decided to start learning Japanese on the side, took Japanese language programs through Harvard, but I found out that there was a program that Harvard was part of that would let students go over to Tokyo and study for a year in kind of like a Japanese boot camp that would prepare them to study at Japanese universities. So that appealed to me, and I entered that program, and it was, as advertised, it was a year of boot camp in Tokyo, and then that led to a Fulbright scholarship at the University of Tokyo, where I studied in the economics department there. I was still way over my head, but I, had this specialty of economics and becoming a specialist in the Japanese economy. And back then, Japan was kind of like China is now. Everybody was afraid it was going to take over the world and so on. So it was kind of interesting to, study it in some detail.
So, when you went for your PhD, what did you think you were going to do next after you got that?
Well, I probably figured I would teach somewhere and be a researcher, but I turned out that my advisor was a consultant with General Motors on some of their labor matters. And when I was looking into, various teaching jobs after grad school, and then found out that the hourly wage at General Motors for an economist was higher than most of those teaching jobs were offering, and it seemed like a pretty interesting, view into the real world. I think GM had 800,000 employees back then, so it was almost like working for the federal government. But I did get a job and finished up my PhD in my first year working at GM. I think that was back in '83 or so.
So that was your first full-time job. I think you had been proud of the fact that you'd gone a long time without
No, no,
having.
Stan, you're wrong, and you may recall this. My first full-time job was at Chambers
Oh,
Gasket Company on the west
nice.
side of Chicago. When I took the year off between sophomore and junior year, I needed to make some money, so I found this gasket company and became an order expediter, which is a thing, and very, very quickly realized I was not cut out for a long-term career in expediting.
Thank you for correcting me on that. But I do think that after that job, you were proud of the fact that was how many years went by between college and your next full-time job.
Yeah, I think my first full-time job at General Motors, I turned 30 then, so I don't think I'd owned a car until then, and hadn't had a real full-time job until I was 30. I'd been kind of one of these professional students living on grants.
And you got to move to Japan. And what was your experience like there living in Japan?
Well, it was, very interesting because it's very different than anything I ever grew up with. We used to joke that when we came back to New York after living in Japan, we liked the fact that New York was cheap, it was full of greenery and not too crowded. So Tokyo was all the opposite of that. But it was really a fascinating place to live. And we ended up living there 5 years altogether, 2 years kind of when I was in my student mode. And then later on, I went back with Merrill Lynch to work as their Japan economist back during the so-called bubble period when the Japanese stock market was soaring and Merrill Lynch was opening its capital markets research division in Tokyo, as well as their trading and investment banking group as well. So that was an interesting time to be there. And I was very fortunate that I was headhunted away from General Motors, which was interesting, but not nearly as interesting as I found the financial markets to be. And that was kind of my foot in the door to get into the financial markets.
So, what are some of the highlights of your illustrious career?
Well, I think that in Japan, I kind of did a lot of work on the bubble economy and did some research that uh, clients found pretty interesting on what the potential pitfalls coming for Japan down the pike were because of the probable collapse of the Japanese real estate bubble and what that would mean to the financial system, so on. That ended up earning me a promotion to Merrill Lynch in New York to head up their entire international economics team. And that happened in 1989, which was really a good year to get out of Japan because Japan, I think just in the last year or so, it's finally gotten the stock market back up to where it was in 1989 when I left. So it went through a pretty, poor period of financial market and economic performance for many years. But that job in New York as head of Merrill's International Economics led me into the money management industry, where I ended up with Credit Suisse Asset Management, New York City, as a money manager and as their strategist for their global equity team. And that in turn led to a group of us leaving in 1999 to form our own investment management company called Trilogy Global Advisors, which was focused on global equities and emerging market equities. And we had a pretty good run on that. Ended up selling that in about 2011 to a large asset management company called AMG. And our team then eventually got folded into a Boston-based company called GWK Investment Management, which was one of AMG's affiliates. And so I'm still there now, working as a strategist for them, helping their clients and also the other investment people kind of, interpret all the complex economic data and issues that continue to come across the screens.
What was it like being the president of Trilogy?
Um, it was fun because we had a very strong growth spurt for a number of years, and I had some really great colleagues and team people I worked with. But there's also pressure running your own business. You can't complain about the stupid boss because you got to look in the mirror and say, oh, if there are things you're not happy with, you're the one responsible at the end of the day. So it was, high risk, high reward, and it was definitely a lesson in entrepreneurship.
In addition to the things you've mentioned already, what are some of the interests or hobbies that you enjoy?
Well, I still sounds boring, but I still love to read. I also enjoy, traveling and spending time with the families of my adult children and our five granddaughters. And Cora and I also really enjoy Broadway musicals, and she occasionally ropes me into Broadway karaoke, which is a passionate interest of hers and of all three of our adult children, who are all a cappella singers in college. Um, on so in terms of other interests, I've really been fascinated by AI in recent years. I've become a big consumer of the various, deep research models of OpenAI and Anthropic and Google, and those have just turbocharged my ability, to address almost any random economic or investment question you can imagine. I don't know how much you've played around with those yourself, but I think it's anyone's guess where AI is headed, but I expect it's going to have just massive economic and social consequences.
Yeah, I don't think I've used it as much as you have, but I have used it and I do see the same things that you do. I think the people that are worried about it, it's really more about how do we take full advantage of it. What I feel is that people aren't investing enough energy in using it and figuring out the good use cases where they can really go a lot further than just using it as a glorified search engine.
Yeah, I agree with that. And but it's tough to keep up with because it changes so
Right.
rapidly.
Now, you've had some other interests along the way. At one time, you were a pilot. What was that like?
That was fun. I'd always been kind of interested in aviation. My father had taken some flying lessons when he was younger too, and so we shared that interest. And I went all the way through getting my private pilot lessons, a license, as well as my instrument license, which is a little more complicated. But I typically flew with a safety pilot, somebody who was better than me, because it's one of those things where overconfidence literally can kill you, and two are always safer than one, especially if one has more experience than the other. So I kind of eventually, also, um, you know, sort of hung up my 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 pilot's license, um, because I never got confident enough to think, oh, this is something. If you don't do it every week, you're not staying current, and it's less safe than if you're truly flying just all the time.
And you had a sailboat at one time. Did you do much sailing?
A little bit on the lake. We've always liked lakes. We have a lake house in Minnesota, close to where my wife Cora grew up. And in Florida, we lived on Lake Osceola in Winter Park, where we just had a small sailboat. I think Barb, your wife Barb, has. I think she's the one who introduced me to Catalina sailboats. They're, it was a real small sailboat where you
Yeah,
could roll the sail down, so it
right.
was easy peasy to get in and out of it. And we just like, tootling around the lake then. But I never tried to compete with what's the guy's name at Oracle who does the America?
Oh, Larry Ellison.
Yeah, Larry Ellison. Yeah, no, I was in the 14-foot sailboat club.
Well, I know you've owned different places in different times. Sometimes I used to kid you about not always remembering which ones you owned. But nowadays, are you splitting your time mostly between Florida and Seattle?
That's right. Yeah, because all three adult kids live out in Seattle now, and our five granddaughters, one of whom just arrived this July. Um, so, but my wife's father still, who's 97 years old now, still lives near us in the Orlando area. So, she wants to be around to help take care of him for as long as he's fortunate enough to be around. But at some point, I think we might move out to Seattle full time.
And you still get to spend some time in the summer up in Minnesota?
Um, it's been less and less these past few years because our kids are all in Seattle,
Hmm.
so we tend to be spending more time, out there than in Minnesota. But we have relatives in Minnesota who, like to get out to the lake, and have been using it in our absence too, and helping keep an eye on things.
Do you miss being in New York?
New York was fun while we were there. Midtown Manhattan, where we lived in Chelsea, just had wonderful restaurants and just all kinds of things to do. But it is pretty intense as well, and kind of nerve-wracking. I like where we live in Orlando right now. We live right on a lake and can take a 2 mile walk in the morning and go right around the side of the lake. And a 2 mile walk in New York City in the morning is like honk, 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 get out of my way, that kind of thing.
Well, let's turn now to the Fave 5 topics, which are books, food, music, sports, and humor. You've already indicated that you love to read. What do you like to read?
Well, I've continued to be a member of a men's book club in Summit, New Jersey, thanks to Zoom. And we alternate between fiction and nonfiction selections every month. And many of the things we read overlap with the kind of books you highlight in your Fave 5 newsletter. So, for example, one recent overlap was My Losing Season by Pat Conroy, which you had recommended last year and which we really like. So there's no particular one theme of the books we read except the nonfiction fiction alternating distinction. But it really is very close to. In fact, I've introduced your newsletter to some of my colleagues in the book club because you've got recommendations that I think resonate with that group.
What's it like being in a book club? I think we tend to think of book clubs as being more of a female domain, but yours is not. What's it like?
Well, it's fun because it gets you together with people once a month to actually talk about something that is usually very interesting, whether it was a fiction book or a nonfiction book. And we also have sort of social gatherings once a year or so, or go out to a restaurant together. And it's just a great group of guys, and we've been doing it, I think, close to 20 years now.
It's impressive. Do you have a favorite book or a favorite author that you'd like to recommend?
Well, I have pretty esoteric taste in science fiction. So, I don't know if you've heard of Neil Stephenson, but he wrote a book called The Diamond Age, which is just a fascinating sort of what if in the 22nd century nanotechnology took off and basically everybody could get anything they need from a little machine where you push a button and it spits out food and any mechanical items you might want. And the book even talked about it was called The Young Lady's Illustrated Guide, which basically sounds like the AI we now have. It's a book that could teach children anything, on any topic, more or less. He's one author that I've really enjoyed following over the years. And there's a guy named Werner Vinge, he was a computer scientist out in a California university. I forget which one. I think UC San Diego. But he's the one who invented the term the singularity to talk about what if technical progress just keeps speeding up. It's already crazy fast, but at a certain point, singularity is a technical term for like what we call black holes, and things speed up so much that the event horizon you can't you can't even see into it because it's things are so fast. So when I'm thinking of economic issues and I think of what AI could mean for the economy, some of his old science fiction work still influences me to this day because there's some fairly serious economists who think you could end up with 10 to 30% GDP growth, over the next few decades per year, if the technology revolution continues to accelerate as it has been. And like one economist at Stanford just posited, he didn't forecast this, but he said, what if you did 10% GDP growth for 40 years? Then your per capita GDP in the US would go from $80,000 per year, which is it is now, to like close to $5 million per year per capita under those kind of accelerating growth scenarios. So, that's, I think, what economists think about when they talk about singularity.
What are you reading right now?
Um, well, right now, I just finished a book for our book club called American Nations, which is a really interesting book talking about 11 different groups within the U.S., all the way from sort of the Tidewater folks to um, the the New Yorkers, to the Midwesterners, to the Appalachian people, to the far West. And it basically makes the point that within the country, there are just dramatic differences in history that explain a lot of the polarization we're seeing in society right now. And so if you don't understand the history of how different the mindset of these various groups was at the forming of the 13 colonies and how that's continued to resonate through the decades since, then it's hard to understand, the incredible polarization we're feeling now. But, it's got some great anecdotes about U.S. history, which are not pleasant to read because they're, like the treatment of the Indians and so on under Andrew Jackson and things like that are just kind of eye-opening and weren't part of my St. Catherine, Siena early grade school history lesson.
Now, you've also been an author. You wrote a book called Boomernomics. Have you thought about writing another book?
I've toyed with the idea, and if I retire, I might do that. But I think it would something called like digital demographics, which are, one of the things I've been following some of these projections of how much AI might accelerate in terms of how many artificial workers in the economy there would be. And like one mind-blowing statistic is that there are currently about 5 billion workers in the world out of 8 billion people. But just in 5 years, if you count the number of artificial workers that could be created with this new technology, the effective global workforce would go to 15 billion from 5 billion in 5 years. And then in 10 years, it could go to something like 65 billion. So I don't think anyone can forecast what the world would look like with that kind of intelligence explosion on the immediate horizon. But that's why I think digital demographic. My other book was Demographics Are Predictable. But if demographics now have to be the sum of human workers and artificial intelligence, it's a whole new ballgame for what it could mean for growth and productivity. But also, potentially concerning impacts on wages, especially wages of, people who've been in the sort of information, manipulation game. Because I'm sure you've noted when you played with these AIs that they are so fast. For them, dealing with us must be like, all right, let's just. I, this guy asked me a question. I gave him an answer. Now, in their subjective time, it must be like hours before you're getting back to them with a follow-up question.
I know it's like my sister is, I was encouraging her to use AI to help her with writing. And so she had written a piece and she put it through Chat GPT. And she said, "Oh, it came back, it converted things to the past tense. What am I going to do?" I said, "Just tell it to put it into the present tense." So she did. Okay, there it is.
Yeah. Yeah, in about 10 seconds, right?
Right, right. All right, on to the next subject. What do you like to eat?
Well, I have, I'm kind of an omnivore, so I like lots of ethnic cuisines, all the way from Chinese, Japanese, Thai, Mexican, Indian, you name it. But I'm also still a big fan of old-fashioned hamburgers and milkshakes. And, one thing that comes to mind on that is you recommended a place called the Convention Grill in Edina outside of Minneapolis many years ago. And I still make every effort I can when I'm in the Minneapolis area to get out to the Convention Grill for one of their great burgers and banana milkshakes. So so it's pretty eclectic, but I follow your recommendations in Fave 5, and I'm just always astounded that you are not taking up much more of the screen than you are taking up now.
We've had some good meals together over the years. If you were going to take me out somewhere, either in Florida or Seattle for a meal, where would you take me?
I think we once visited together one of my favorite restaurants in Florida called the Beach Bistro in Anna Maria Island, which
Yes.
is right on the beach and
Hmm.
serves it's mainly American cuisine, but just superbly done. And I think it's often mentioned as one of the top restaurants in Florida. So I'd revisit there with you and Barb at any time. Just let me know.
And what about in Seattle? Any place there that comes to mind that's a favorite?
Well, we go a lot to a place called Ivar's, which is a seafood place that's both downtown, and then there's one walking distance from where we spend time in Wallingford. But there are tons of great seafood places, as you might guess, in Seattle.
You still have an interest in the Mexican restaurant in Orlando?
Yeah, I still have a small ownership interest in it, and it's been highly rated by the Orlando press, but it still hasn't been an economic home run. So we call it return of capital rather than return on capital.
Is it
But
what, a high-end Mexican?
it was initially viewed as there was a restaurant one of my business partners liked in New York a lot called Toloache. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's on, I
No.
think, 52nd Street and 8th Avenue, but it's kind of gourmet Mexican. And so that was the inspiration. But I think we rapidly found in the early days of the restaurant that the market couldn't bear gourmet Mexican prices.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's still higher end Mexican cuisine, but uh, aiming to be more affordable for the masses.
So do you consider yourself a restaurant entrepreneur?
No, it's been very much arm's length, and the people who run it are wonderful, and they've done a remarkable job in a tough industry because, boy, it's a tough industry.
Moving on to music, do you have a favorite song or musician or concert or album that you think of?
Well, I like all kinds of music, but a couple of musicians I've really liked have been the group The Cranberries. I think I loved their songs, and Dolores O'Riordan's voice was just incredible to me. She comes from Limerick in Ireland, which is where my family came from
Hmm.
originally. Unfortunately, she passed away early, but I still love to listen to her music.
Yes.
And then I do like Coldplay as well. I think the song Yellow is, I just love that song. But I would advise if you're going to a Coldplay concert to go with somebody you want to be seen with on the Jumbotron as opposed to the opposite of that. So,
Yeah, I hate it when that happens.
yeah.
What was the first record that you bought?
In my impecunious youth, I never bought any vinyl records. So I do subscribe to Spotify, but I have not been a record buyer.
Did you ever buy a single or a CD or a cassette or none of those?
No, I always listened to whatever was available.
Who was buying records then in your family? Was somebody else?
But, well, my mom would buy like classical records and
Hmm.
opera and Broadway musical stuff. So I, got that exposure through my mother, who had been a music major in college. So my family loves music, and like I say, all three of my adult children, were really into a cappella singing in college and continue to be involved in choirs
When did
and
you start getting into karaoke?
um, I'd like to say Japan because that's where it was invented. And we did, go to some clubs occasionally in Japan. One of my memories there was going to a country western club in Japan, and the guy would sing like in a Johnny Cash accent and sound impeccable. And then if you tried to strike up a conversation in English afterwards, you couldn't speak a word of English. So it was really pretty curious that way. But the I think that it was more the karaoke. Ah, Probably when our kids were in college is, we've purchased some karaoke equipment. My brother Tom, who also has sort of he purchased a big karaoke rig about 15 years ago, or got one from one of his friends, and sort of became a master of karaoke parties. And he's created this big party place in West Palm Beach where he has a big karaoke machine. And when our families get together, we love, having his karaoke machine, lead us into the through the night.
Is there a song that you tend to sing when you do karaoke?
I like some of Johnny Cash songs, so I like Folsom City or Folsom Prison Blues
Mhm.
would be one of them. But if you want the goofy old crowd pleasers, you got to go with Neil Diamond's "Sweet Caroline," which I know really offends a lot of people, but it's
Including Barb. She's not a fan of that. Um, when was the last concert you attended?
well. Speaking of Neil Diamond, we did uh, what was it called? A Beautiful Noise was a show. It was more of a biopic that we went to in Orlando of Neil Diamond's life, but it was really just dedicated to all his songs, and that was a lot of fun.
But that was a film.
No, it was like a traveling Broadway musical. It was
Oh,
a
musical like
musical
like
of his
Jersey
life.
Boys.
Yeah, yeah, similar to that.
Okay.
I'm not sure that qualifies as a concert
So
per
how
se.
about a concert? Can you think of one that you went to?
Um, I've always never been a big fan of concerts because I'm kind of noise sensitive, and I will, like Broadway musicals are about as loud as I like
Okay.
to get.
I remember one that I was with you at though, and that was in New York. We went to see George Benson at Town Hall. Do you remember that?
Oh, right, right, that's right. And was your brother playing with him then?
Yeah. My brother
Yeah,
was playing with him, and
yeah,
afterwards, Barb was helping him sell CDs out. Remember
yeah,
that out in the lobby, and there was like this flurry of activity, frenzied.
Yeah.
transactions, and then everything was sold.
And we went to see the David Garfield show. Or I think it was he was playing with George Benson in Tokyo once, when way back when we were
Oh,
living
wow.
in Japan. He visited, I think, Japan, and we went to one of his shows. It was really a treat.
And I think we went and saw Sarah Bareilles together here in Detroit not that long ago. So that's
That's
another
true
one.
too. Yeah.
All right. Well, the next one will be interesting. Do you enjoy watching any sports?
Um, I don't follow any professional teams, but as a swimmer, I have always liked watching the Olympics, and I have really fond memories of watching, Mark Spitz get his 7 gold medals back whenever that was. That was 1972,
Two,
I think.
1972.
Yeah, and then I was equally excited for Michael Phelps in 2008 in Beijing when he got the 8 gold medals. So those are kind of my most memorable sporting events that kind of resonated me because of my humble swimming origins. But watching the big boys, and it astounds me how good the swimming times have become even since the when I was doing it in the 70s. I mean, just the world record, the 50-yard freestyle is something like 17.6 seconds now, and I just can't imagine how anyone could swim that fast.
You were telling me that your nephew's swimming times are all better than Mark Spitz's.
Yeah, and he was a Division I swimmer. His name is Timmy Ellett, an excellent swimmer at University of Kentucky, and just missed qualifying for the Olympics. But there, like I think I looked up his times from Mark Spitz, back in the 70s, and in multiple events, his times were significantly faster than Mark Spitz. So now you can have, barely make it to the Olympics. Um, um, and still be somebody who could beat Mark Spitz across the board in pretty much every stroke. It's just astonishing.
You have any favorite memory of when you were a swimmer? Did you have any particular moment that was a good one that stood out?
Um, yeah, it's hard to say anything stood out. I think I stood out in the negative sense when I went to the Big Ten meet and literally was one of the worst swimmers in the Big Ten in my event. So yeah, it stands out. But I was actually pretty good and became the swimming captain at Carleton College. So the difference between Division III and Division I is literally night and day.
So Division III was where you belonged.
Division III was where I belonged.
Yeah.
And,
All right. The final category is comedy. Do you have a favorite comedian or comedy film or TV show or book that comes to mind?
I'm reaching way back, but I think you remember when Monty Python came out. I thought that was just hysterical, and I have strong memory of when I was over at my high school girlfriend's house, and the first time I ever saw my Monty Python was when they happened to turn on that show, and they were all staring at it, going, "This is really weird." And I was on the floor, like convulsed in laughter. I just had never seen anything so funny, and I'm still a big fan of all their old work. But also, I think you and I have this in common too. I'm a big fan of Steve Martin too, and really, loved his work over the years. Not only the stand-up routines, but also some of the movies he made. Um,
I remember that we helped you move up to Carleton, I think, for your senior year. My sister and Barb and I drove up to Chicago, I think, picked you up when we went in 2 cars up to Minnesota together, but we stopped for the night in Madison. And if I remember right, my sister Joan who had been watching Monty Python on Chicago TV, but we hadn't gotten it yet in St. Louis. So I'd never seen it. But all I had from her was her recounting of some of the funny bits,
mhm.
which I thought were great. And I was
Yeah.
starting to repeat these
What have the Romans
lines.
ever done for us?
All right. So, final question: who is the best at making you laugh, and who are you able to crack up?
Well, my brothers, and you've met, I think, all of my brothers at this point, are all wise guys, and they do crack me up. And Cora just my wife Cora, just can never believe how we make each other laugh with the same old jokes we've been telling for years and years. And she kind of rolls her eyes, say, "How does it strike you guys as funny?" But for some reason we do, and they crack me up, and I crack them up. Um, but you know, So, and my dad was a big storyteller and jokester too, which,
Yeah, your
made,
family is a lot of fun. We get together. We were together not too long ago at your daughter's wedding, and we were doing a lot of laughing with all your siblings. Who are you able to crack up?
well, that gets kind of rough because I like telling jokes to my family and my adult children. Most of the time, it's an eye roll opposed to cracking them up. But it's really my granddaughters, the old ones who are old enough, the four older ones who are 6 to 9 years in age, they really roll their eyes. So I think if you think dad jokes are bad, granddad jokes are maybe even worse.
I thought you were going to say you can make your grandchildren laugh.
Yeah, no, I wish that were the case, and I occasionally do. I think I occasionally throw them a curveball, but it's eye rolls are the more typical
So you
response.
once told me a story that I still tell to this day. In fact, I've told it to my grandchildren and they act amazed. But the story was that one night you were with one of your brothers late night having uh, late night snacks. You were eating cereal in the kitchen and talking, and it just kept pouring more and more bowls of cereal. And eventually you said you had realized you had had 21 bowls of cereal, which
Well,
was two
not
and a half.
personally 21, but I think my brother and I basically knocked off a couple of boxes of
All right,
cereal.
but you had a couple, two and a half boxes of cereal. When I tell that to my grandson, he goes, 21 bowls of cereal. Very impressed by that.
It was a health food.
All right, so it's time for a story. What story would you like to share with us?
Uh, Probably going back to you'd asked about turning points in people's lives, and I'd mentioned I had studied in Japan, but I think my decision to study Japanese way back in 1978 was a big turning point, and I mainly studied it because I liked foreign languages. I discovered, in college, for example, I learned a lot of German during my time in Salzburg, Austria. But most Europeans know English so well that it's like, well, your German is cute, but let's speak English instead. And you can't blame them because their English is so much better than my German would ever have been. But Japanese was a much more challenging language to learn. And unlike Europeans, the Japanese were more than happy to speak Japanese with you, since they had such hellish memories of, trying to learn English for their insanely competitive examination system. So, learning Japanese opened a lot of doors for me. It paid for most of my grad school because there was what was called the National Defense Foreign Language grants that basically the government provided to Americans who would study certain languages in grad school along with their technical studies. And it also helped me win a Fulbright scholarship to study at the University of Tokyo. It got my foot in the door in the financial industry, which was, I think, a great fit for my interests and abilities. And it also provided a great adventure for me to see the world along with, Cora, the love of my life, who also loved language learning and foreign travel. So I would say maybe the only downside is that due to distance, we missed the Stan Garfield Barb Hayes wedding of the century, which probably in its day was something like, Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce event. So there was that.
Well, I've got a few stories of my own to share about you. Going back, you mentioned the Fulbright scholarship. So when you got married in 1980, you got this money for the Fulbright scholarship, but you didn't need it because Cora was going to be working, and so it's ironic, I'd say, that I was giving advice to someone who ended up running a big investment company. But nonetheless, at that particular time, I was advising you on which mutual funds to put that money into. So I think we bought 5 different funds, if I remember right. And I had you sign, and we had the forms, and you're writing the checks. And I told you, all right, whatever you do, leave this money alone. Just leave this money alone, and it'll grow, and you'll thank me later. And so I think it wasn't that much later when you needed the money for something. I think you ended up cashing in and that. But then later on, you told me that you had forgotten about one of the funds, lost track of it, and they were tracking you down. I think the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was about to take the money away from the Evergreen Fund, and then it had grown into a nice substantial amount because you had forgotten about it.
That's exactly right. I think it was, $3,000 invested turned into 50,000, which was just astonishing because, set and forget is really a very, very useful concept in financial markets. But we moved around so much that we lost track of that one in the mail.
So after I left Northwestern after 1 year, after our freshman year, you left after 2 years. I transferred to Washington University in St. Louis, but I was writing letters back to some of the friends that I had made freshman year during my sophomore year, and several of the other people that lived on our floor had written back to me, but you had not written back to me. The one person that hadn't responded, by the end of the year, I wondered if I was ever going to hear from you again. And then I got this letter late in the spring that said, well, you probably think me a callow jerk for not having written, but I'm sorry, but here's my letter. So then that rekindled our friendship. We arranged to meet up, and I think we've seen each other most years since then.
Well, Stan, I'd sent you many texts and you never replied to the text back then. Isn't it amazing? We used to write letters.
Physical letters is what we wrote.
Physical
That's
letters
right.
posted in the mail.
So I remember one time you came down to visit, I think it was 1974. You came down to visit us in St. Louis in the summer of 74. Never a good time to visit St. Louis in the summer because it's so hot. But anyway, you would come down and I was meeting you at the Greyhound bus station in downtown St. Louis, not exactly the most desirable place to meet up. And when you arrived, I came up to you and I made some remark to you about like, has anybody molested you yet? And then you were about to answer, and immediately some guy came up and started hassling us. So that was another one. And then another story that I recall is the freshman year. It seemed like your dad had brought you like one of every major appliance to your dorm room. I remember you having like deep fryers and pressure cookers, and you had a full-size refrigerator, and this was not allowed in the dorms.
Yeah, I
And
think I was in violation of some codes.
yeah, it was a fire code violation. People often would have those little mini fridges that they could hide easily in their closet, but you had this full-sized big white refrigerator. So one day the fire inspectors were coming, and word was passed down, and everyone on our floor had an interest in having you keep your refrigerator because we all used it. So there was this word like a fire brigade that spread down. The fire inspectors are coming, and it reached your room. And I remember there was a bunch of guys that went in and helped to frantically move the refrigerator into the closet and hide it by the time that the fire inspector reached there.
Yeah, I think you were like Paul Revere of that group to preserve the fridge. Because
So those
they
were
didn't
good
have
times
meals
back
on
then.
Sunday, right? So you
What's
needed,
that?
they did not have meals in the dorms on Sunday.
They
So
did not have meals on Sunday. I remember we would be, it was like Pavlov's dog reaction. There'd be the smell of cooking bacon and pancakes wafting down the hallway from your room. And it was like we were drawn to it. I recall, I think you tried to set up an entrepreneurial venture of that,
yeah.
selling food to the starving students. Well, I want to thank you for being my guest today, and also for being a great friend over all these years. I'm so glad that you did write that letter back to me sophomore year, and that we've been able to keep up the friendship for such a long time. And is there anything else you'd like to say before we conclude today's podcast?
No, I would just respond in kind by saying thanks for being such a great friend for many, many years. And it's wonderful we've been able to stay in touch and look forward to many more occasions. And I'm also looking forward to your TikTok dance channel.
All right, you may be looking forward to that for a while. But in the meantime, you can follow this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or on YouTube. Thanks a lot, Bill.
Thank you, Stan.